Well, good morning, Choose Views listeners and watchers and all that. There's lots of people who have been in the progressive movement for a long time, and those that have come recently. But for those who have been around for a minute, we've had the opportunity to talk with a number of those folks. Going back to the convention, I had the opportunity to meet with and do an interview with Dr. Allison Gill, who's a veteran, former federal government executive, a comedian, author, but most importantly, a staunch advocate of the democratic resistance and the democratic process. And definitely, as I like to say, she's a stone cold progressive. So I want to welcome to Choose Views this morning, Dr. Allison Gill. Good morning.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Stone cold progressive. I like it. Okay.
We've been around the block a little bit. We can say things like that and not be offensive and be complimentary to those that we respect. And I just it was a pleasure to meet you at the convention. And I had one of those moments where it's like, that's Allison Gill. I've got to talk to her. And then if you recall, we had the opportunity to do a kind of a joint interview with Harry Dunn, who is, rightfully so, become legendary in the last few years since the J6, storming of the Capitol. So if you could, Allison, tell us a little bit about your work with MSW Media and how you got that started and why you got it started. I'm sure many people have heard your name. They've seen some of the things that you've done, but they don't really know what got you to the point to putting that together and now being, really the senior executive with MSW Media.
Oh gosh, well, I was working for the federal government, as you know. I actually took the executive oath of office the same day Obama did, January 20th, 2009. And, he actually inspired me to be of service again. And so that's when I decided, when he was campaigning in 2008. So that's when I decided to go back to work with veterans at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And, after Trump won, the morality in the executive branch in the federal government and the agencies, I worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, just sort of tanked. And then almost immediately, Robert Mueller took over the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election from Crossfire Hurricane. And MSNBC started playing an old documentary called All the President's Men Revisited. It was a 2012 or 2013 documentary about Watergate, because they were coming up on an anniversary. And I think they were showing that to illustrate the parallels between the special counsel Mueller investigation and the investigation into Watergate. And I started thinking to myself, like, this Mueller thing is going to be historic. This is a pretty big deal. How do I want to get in on that action, right? Like I want to be a part of this somehow. Following it very closely, and I noticed there was not any one single place where you could get all of the Mueller news in one shot. So, I did what all comedians do. I started a podcast, and I did it at my kitchen table. And I did it, at nights and on the weekends. And, I had been a comedian at that point doing podcasting and stuff like that for 10 years. And the government never cared about me telling jokes until Donald Trump was the joke. And it was at that point that the administration, Office of General Counsel, investigated my podcast and then eventually removed me from my position. By doing the old Mick Mulvaney trick of moving your job across country and getting you to quit. If you recall, he told a room full of wealthy donors that it's very difficult to fire a federal government employee, but we have a new way. We found a way to do it. We move their jobs and then they quit. And so that solves that problem to get rid of non-loyalists to the Trump administration. And of course, with the second Trump term, he promises Schedule F, which just allows him to fire anybody at will. But that's how it started, at the kitchen table with two of my friends who were also local comedians. And we just started covering the Mueller investigation. And it blew up. It took off. It was the only place you could get all your Mueller news. And from there, after the Mueller investigation wound down, I started the Daily Beans. And then, of course, the Jack Smith investigation began. And I called up my good friend Andy McCabe, former deputy director of the FBI, and said, "Hey, you want to do this podcast with me?" He said, "Absolutely." And then, of course, there's a third show that I host with Pete Strzok, who's, former, I think, assistant deputy director of counterintelligence or for
Yep.
the FBI. And with those three shows, and then a bunch of other shows that I think are like-minded progressive shows, I launched MSW Media, which is a podcast network for progressive causes, news, justice, and politics, and that's where we are today.
That's fantastic. The journey is always, hearing the journey is always exciting because most of the time, and you know this from your career experience and just life experience, suddenly a person is at a spot. And if you don't know what got them there, you may not necessarily appreciate the journey and the work that they put in and the things that they had to deal with, the ordeal. In your case, you got sent out to the hinterlands, and by that measure, you were pushed into a situation that forced your hand. And now look at what we have. We have this great podcast network that you've created, and so many people have benefited. Both the folks who are providing content, but also and your host that you work with, but also the people who are listening to the work that's out there. So kudos to you for that. And I really appreciate the fact that you've been able to not only start it and build it, but maintain it. And I know that, the listeners of the different programs are appreciative of that. So I wanted to ask you a question about the Mueller piece. I mean, content-wise, or not content, but in terms of the work that you were doing at that time, how were you able to navigate, working full-time and then, doing this from your kitchen table, did I hear you say, and doing it kind of in the evenings and such?
Yeah, well, like I said, I had been a comedian for a long time, and I had just finished my PhD. So that opened up a bunch of free time, as you can imagine. But, for a very long time, and this connects to my military service, I'm a survivor of military sexual trauma, and that moderate to severe PTSD that I have, the way that I cope with it, unfortunately, many veterans cope with it through self-harm or alcohol, drugs. But the way I coped has always been to just always stay busy. And so for my whole career, I was, working full time, going to school full time, on nights and the weekends, doing comedy, doing music. I was always doing something in order to keep my mind occupied. And I had found as I, got a little bit later into the PTSD that one of the things I really enjoy, or one of the things that really motivates me, is knowledge. Because the more you know about politics and the news, the less it can surprise you. And that's a big problem with folks with PTSD, is surprises.
Mm-hmm.
And it's why we watch the same movies and the same shows over again. It's why we aren't too badly affected on the 4th of July, but anytime anyone else sets fireworks off in September, it's a problem because we're not expecting it. And so knowledge is the enemy for me to anxiety, and it also helps you prevent you from being gaslit or have anybody rake you over the coals or have anybody pull the wool over your eyes. And so I thought, I'm going to learn as much as I can. And I learned by teaching. So I thought, man, if I share all this information, I'll have it all in there. And I perhaps can help other people combat anxiety, this political national anxiety we've been going through for the last 8 or 9 years with knowledge.
So the PhD obviously has been very helpful, but your natural curiosity for information and knowledge, which are two different things in my opinion, how have you found that's helped other people who might have similar traumas or not different traumas, but still are struggling with their forms of PTSD?
Well, I think the three most important words in the English language, some people say it's "I love you." I think it's "you're not alone." And the number one thing that I heard over and over again from people listening to any of the shows that I produce is you helped keep me sane. I'm a blue dot in a red sea, and you made me feel like I wasn't alone. And, I learned that back from my military sexual trauma days when I very first told my story to anyone except my therapist. It was an interview for the movie The Invisible War. And I still felt like shame and that the whole incident was my fault and that I was crazy because they had gaslit me so hard. But when I saw the film and the way that they used my interview was they put me in this supercut of a bunch of people who had experienced the exact same things, who had the exact same things said to them when they tried to report their rape. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't alone, and that allowed me to feel like I wasn't crazy. And that helped me to be able to set my boundaries and know the difference between reality and what what your brain might tell you. So I really think that helping people feel like they're not alone is something that I set out to do. I wanted people to know you're not nuts. This is happening. It's real, and everything you're feeling about it is valid.
You're not alone. Yeah, when you said that, I'm glad I was just listening, because I think the three words, I love you, but then when I heard you say you're not alone, yeah, that's super powerful, because you could be in a scenario where a person is experiencing some trauma and telling them that I love you doesn't really resonate. But because when you're feeling trauma, when you're feeling afraid, you're feeling any of those emotions, knowing that you've got someone that you can reach out to or that will reach out to you gives that person a little bit of certainty in that moment. So I applaud that. That's a book. That's a short movie that you and I could work on together. You're not alone, because those are definitely powerful words. And I want to pivot back to, you've mentioned a couple times the sexual assault that you experience, and you recently posted on social media an extraordinarily powerful video that I've shared with everybody that I can share with. I've reposted it on my socials. I've talked about it, and it is an extraordinarily powerful bit of information, story of your experience. But it's brave as hell that you were willing to do that and do it at this particular time. Why did you do it? What was the reason that you said, okay, I have to go ahead and put this out at this time?
Well, a lot of it comes back to the "you're not alone" thing, but because bad guys want you to feel isolated. It's how they can control you, or bad people, I should say. But I think that there are a lot of voters out there, or I should say Americans out there, who aren't as politically plugged in as perhaps you or I, or the listeners of this program, who might not understand the stakes, and not through no fault of their own. It's just that some people like to tune it out because it's too traumatic to listen to, which I totally understand. But I feel like like a third of Americans didn't vote in 2016, and I think that was a huge problem for us as a democracy. And so I'm trying to reach as many people as I can, particularly in key swing states where there are large military and veterans and military family populations, to be like, if there's just one thing that might affect you and impact you. So it's almost like a micro targeting, but on a larger scale. Every time I tell my story, I inevitably get people sending me tons of messages saying, thank you, I think this happened to me, or let me tell you my story, so that they don't feel alone. And so, I guess there's multiple reasons to do it. But obviously the number one reason is to get Kamala Harris and Tim Walz elected. Absolutely.
So what's the number one thing in your observation that voters should be focused on these next 12 to 14 days?
For me, I would say talking to people in your communities that are low propensity voters or might not be into politics, quote unquote. I just don't pay attention, or folks who might generally not vote, and talk to them, because the best rate of return we get on get out to vote is personal conversations. And a lot of people are like, well, I want to try to flip my MAGA relatives. And to that I say, no, that takes too much time. Talk to people who haven't decided or wouldn't normally vote, and find something in Project 2025 that relates to them. There's something in there for everybody. So whether they're an educator, a woman, a veteran, a military, active duty military member, a spouse of a military, he wants to privatize TRICARE, he wants to take away VA benefits. I mean, there's so many things in there, and just talk to them about that. That would be the number one thing I think everybody could do, because I know we're all going to vote. Everybody listening's probably already voted. So talk to the people in your community. You're a hairdresser, you're an esthetician, you're the person at the grocery store, maybe some members of your family who just sit out usually, and just, don't be afraid to beg.
As the song goes, ain't too proud to beg.
Right.
So.
My uterus is on the line, or I have kids in school whose lives are on the line because of gun violence, or I could lose my benefits. You could lose your benefits, and just make your plea and see if you can give them a ride to the polls.
Mm-hmm.
If they are like still on the fence, be like, you're coming with me, and
just jump in the car.
Already voted.
I'm tired. I need you to keep me awake for this short drive to the parking lot. So just keep me awake, and then drag their behind inside and say, now you get a vote. No, I've been saying on my show since the show started back in February, Allison, that the number one thing that everybody has to do is know that you're registered and check it every other week, every other Monday. Know where you're going, know what your cadence is going to be, how you're going to get there, the whole nine. Take an extra bottle of water in case you need it versus somebody that you can give it to, particularly in the swing states. So I appreciate you saying that in terms of folks, just staying focused and most importantly, getting out and begging folks if you have to, because this is not a time for pride to get in the way of getting the job done. As we wrap up, and I really appreciate you taking the time today. I've been wanting to have this talk with you, and looking forward to having future talks. I know that our time difference, FYI, Allison's on Pacific Standard Time, you guys. So she said, "Nah, Richard, I dig you, and I dig your show, and I dig WCPT, but I'm not getting up at 4:00 in the morning to talk to you." So I'm putting words in her mouth. But that being said, thank you so much for being with us. But as we wrap up, after the election, we win. We being Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are elected president and vice president. What happens next? What's our next battle?
For me, that's easy. Covering all of Trump's trials and convictions and sentences. That's pretty simple for me.
I will fly out to the West Coast and we'll do some live work together, because that would just be fun. I love how you laughed. You laughed joyously when you said that.
But no, I think, for me, being a progressive, my job is to push the establishment to the left. Always be pushing to the left. Once we get Harris and Walz in there, start making your case for more progressive policies. And you can see how far we've come over. It was Biden, I think, during the Obama administration, who was like, I like gay marriage. And Obama's like, dude, cool it. We can't say that yet. And Biden's like, I don't care. And, we're pushing everybody to the left. And regardless of the policy position, the whole point of keeping our democracy intact is so that we can push our leaders to do better. And I think that will become the focus. Get the ERA on the books, for God's sakes. It's been how many years? Start talking about a universal health care option. I'm super progressive. I like direct government paid care, but not Medicare for all. I'm super progressive in that way. But just start pushing a little harder now that we've got who we need in the White House, and then we go from there.
And making sure that we have the Senate, we have the House of Representatives, and as I say on every show of mine, that we have state legislatures, because they've got to be prepared to catch that legislation and to catch those dollars literally that will come from the federal government when we do have those people in the right positions. So
get rid of the Electoral College, overturn Citizens United, all the things we've been talking about. We've got to win first, and then we start pushing.
Absolutely. Allison Gill, y'all, MSW Media, and one hell of a progressive that makes it clear that that's what we have to do, what we have to seek out, and what we have to be. Thank you, Allison, for being with us this morning. I really appreciate you setting aside some time so that we can chat.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you again, and thanks for all the work you're doing.
You too. We'll talk soon.